Are we witnessing the return of two Superboys, and dare I even hope? Hi, I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Welcome to Essential Issues Weekly, where I talk about DC Comics 1 week after their release on the Ultra tier of the DC Universe Infinite subscription service. In each installment, I pick an assortment of comics to talk about as a DC fan and also explore what, if anything, they have to say about the essential issues of real life. Now, warning, full spoilers for everything I talk about. That's your first and only warning. I think this one's going to be a pretty short one. We're looking at comics originally released to the Ultra tier on August 6th, 2025, and originally published July 9th, 2025. First of that group is Aquaman number 7. This is continuing Jeremy Adams' run, in which Aquaman has water-based powers now and is going on this sort of almost sword and sorcery type of adventure with Captain Nemo. And is the mage's name Arion? A-R-I-O-N. I'm never quite sure how to pronounce that. And the Lady of the Lake. And there's a nice moment, actually I found it quite touching, between Arthur and Mera that I won't spoil, but it seems it's a one-off kind of scenario that looks like this is not really reality. We're going to get a reset. But it was a warped reality type situation that allowed for a very touching type of experience that I liked. Nevertheless, I am losing interest in this story. I love the idea of Aquaman having water-based powers, and I liked what was being done with that to explore that. But I'm not as interested, I think, in the let's go on an adventure that has some sword and sorcery vibes. I'd rather get into Aquaman's head more. I feel like a lot is happening, and I want to be taken inside Arthur Curry's head more, understand what is driving him, get introspective as he's in this new era with these new powers. That's kind of what I'm hoping is coming. I'm not sure if Jeremy Adams is the type of writer that's going to be able to deliver that. He seems very largely action-focused, plot-focused, moving things forward. I guess I'm just not really wanting that with Aquaman. In large part because I still feel like I need to get to know Aquaman. I don't know that there's been a defining run that I've read anyway. Maybe I need to go back and read some Peter David Aquaman or something. I don't know. But anyway, love the new water powers. I'm losing interest in this particular arc. We'll see what happens in the next issue. But that's Aquaman number 7. Then we've got Batman and Robin 23. This is continuing a storyline and kind of getting close to wrapping it up. That's not been all that exciting for me either. Kind of a murder mystery, dipping back into Bruce Wayne's early days when he was training to be a detective and stuff. I think the most noteworthy thing in here was this kind of like touching moment, another touching family moment, but this time between Bruce and his son Damian. But other than that, I think I'm ready for this Memento storyline to be over. I don't find the villain to be all that interesting. And so, yeah, don't really have anything more to say about Batman and Robin number 23. Action Comics 1088 is continuing with this sort of like flashback storyline that's getting us reacquainted with some earlier years in Clark's life. This is part of the Summer of Superman event, which almost certainly is intended to introduce new readers to the Superman comic book that are just getting into the comics for the first time because of the Superman movie. And I like this story. You know, I could certainly do without Superman having a Superboy era. I was fine with that going away, and for his first time putting on the costume and going out and doing superheroics to be as Superman. But over the years, they've kind of like waffled and said, well, he did kind of have a Superboy era, but it was mostly undercover. Most people didn't hear about him. He was kind of like an urban legend or whatever. But more and more, it's like, okay, well, he's doing so much stuff at this point, and he's showing up in headlines with pictures of his face. And I'm like, I don't think we can call this an urban legend era of his life. I think we have returned now to the idea that Superman, as a boy, was doing superheroic things, became known to the public as Superboy. I'm not super thrilled about that, but the moment-by-moment kind of focus on character and his early days, I'm still appreciating. I at least like that they changed up his costume a bit, so he has these trunks, almost like boxer briefs that he's wearing instead of the normal red trunks, and red tennis shoes, and so his costume still has this a different vibe to it and a slightly more thrown together kind of vibe. And so I appreciate that. I could stand for it to feel even more thrown together, but at least it's giving it a different vibe so that we're not seeing him as quite complete. He really becomes complete when he becomes Superman. And if that's the vibe they're going for, then I might have a little more tolerance for there being a Superboy era in Clark Kent's history, and I'm liking this story fine at this point, I suppose. The most noteworthy, so that's Action Comics 1088. The most noteworthy comic this week for me was part of the Summer of Superman, a one-shot called Superman Treasury 2025 Hero for All. Now, I didn't actually find this story all that exciting or engaging, but one thing I found mystifying was that Jon Kent, as in young Jon Kent, is in this story. He's right there at the beginning. Clark is wanting his parents, Ma and Pa Kent, to take Jon out of Metropolis because Clark is catching wind of the fact that some major alien invasion is coming. He just wants Jon safe and out of the way. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that this is Jon Kent before he was aged up, because he's shorter than Clark, and when Clark is saying, I want you to go back to Smallville with my parents, he's like, aw, but I want to stay with you, Dad. And so, he's shorter than him. He's being written as very young. What is going on here? There's nothing at the beginning that says, 2 years ago, or this story takes place at this such and such a time. I guess I'm just kind of assuming that it's a wee bit of a flashback, but some of the details get a little bit screwy. Now, at first, the details get confusing because we're seeing these sort of, flashback type experiences where Clark's parents, or at least a flashback to when he was younger, his dad dies in a tornado, which I think is probably a little bit of a nod to the Man of Steel movie. And those stories are told in a different kind of visual style that indicates they're a flashback. But I'm like, okay, well, this is not in DC Comics what happened. So is this an Elseworld story right now? Well, eventually what we figure out is he's being manipulated. He's in some kind of a simulated reality he can't get out of that is creating an alternate timeline, an alternate life for him, that eventually he realizes, hey, no, this isn't life as I remember it. And that's when a key, confusing, but maybe a hopeful moment takes place. He starts to wake up and he says, I remember all of it now, my real life. In this whole sequence, we get a recap of some of the major events in Superman's life, including his fight with Doomsday and Cyborg Superman and various other events, marrying Lois. We even see a reference to Superman Red and Blue when he was kind of in that electric phase. We've got a reference to Kenny Braverman and the whole death of Clark Kent storyline. Then we get to him remembering the birth of his son, Jon. And we get a flashback again that shows us that they moved far. He says, we moved far from Metropolis, living quiet, secret lives, precious years alone so we could give Jon a normal childhood. I'm like, okay, so this is already a bit of a retcon, because initially this took place as part of the Convergence crossover, or really connected to that, where we had the New 52 Superman active as the Superman in the New 52 world, but eventually they started sneaking the original pre-New 52 Superman and Lois back into continuity, saying they were living in this new world. They kind of survived by coming to this new world, but were living in hiding, raising Jon Kent. But here in this retelling, he says, we moved far from Metropolis, living quiet, secret lives, suggesting that in this new refashioned continuity from whatever the last reboot was, or the continuity reset, that in this one there was no maybe convergence event or something, but they just opted to leave Metropolis at some point and go into hiding, or maybe not into hiding, but he just says so we could live a quiet, he says living quiet, secret lives. So I'm not sure in this new continuity how much of the New 52 Superman storyline and all that stuff still exists. So it's really a bit confusing and muddy at this point, but they've got a reference to this period living on the farm. They got a reference to dealing with Mxyzptlk, and then this is where it gets interesting. He mentions his dad, Jor-El, which I believe it was Brian Michael Bendis in his story when he came on, superstar writer, seemed to just be given rights to do whatever he wanted. And part of what he wanted to do was tell this story with Jor-El, where it turns out Jor-El survived, but he's also been kind of shattered and messed up by surviving the death of Krypton. And he eventually, I guess, at some point, he convinces Clark to let him take Jonathan on this kind of adventure to get, well, here's what it says. My natural father managed to survive Krypton's death, but he was broken emotionally, not exactly a joyful reunion. That could have dragged me down, if not for Jon's amazing exuberance and zest for life. That's what makes him so special. Jon gives me hope. Now, I didn't have time to dig all the way back through, but I thought that by the time Clark discovers that Jor-El was just kind of like broken and, well, kind of a villain. I mean, eventually he kind of, in a sense, took Jon, but they got sucked through a black hole. I feel like there was some real antagonism going on with Jor-El. And it was on this it was part of this story with Jor-El that Jon Kent got aged up super fast. He got, I can't even remember the details of it. It's something I'd much rather forget. And he ends up getting kind of like stuck in a volcano on Earth 3 with Ultraman, the evil version of Superman, holding him prisoner there, and time is moving at a faster pace there. And so in just a span of a few months, he ages up to basically a young adult. Now, I believe it was Dan Jurgens, who's writing this story, who created the young Jon Kent character. He was not responsible for aging him up. And, I'm sure the aged up Jon Kent has his fans. He's certainly become, or maybe was intended to become, I don't really know what the perception is among those who would want this, but I think the intention was for him to kind of be a character that the LGBTQ plus community could really kind of root for and glom onto, because he was gay, or at least bisexual. I can't remember exactly, where his character lands, but he's in a relationship with another young man. Well, from what I understand, that whole plot thread is wrapping up. Secret 6, number 6 is when I read online, as I was trying to figure this whole thing out, that seems to be wrapping up. Now, that hasn't come to DC Universe Infinite yet on the Ultra tier. It should be coming very soon, and so I will be checking that out and kind of sharing what I find there and my speculation about the future. However, hearing that at least his relationship as a young adult with this other boy is wrapping up, and then this strong focus that is conspicuously on Jon Kent when he is young. And it's a flashback, but not like a full-on long time ago flashback. It's just flashing back conveniently far enough to when Jon Kent was still young. And this, again, remember, is part of the All-In initiative that's trying to introduce people to Superman that are not familiar with the comic, the character in the comics. This is supposed to be an onboarding point, a jumping on point. And this is the version of Jon Kent that is being presented there as part of Superman's backstory, his continuity, all that kind of stuff. And so these two things combined, especially since Dan Jurgens is such a respected and celebrated creator when it comes to Superman for decades now, and they're using him during this big initiative, I wonder if we are finally going to see some kind of a de-aging, or if we're going to have something that's like, okay, Jon Kent dies, but then we find out that we can go back in time and save him before he was aged up, or something like that. Or this is a parallel reality Jon Kent that was aged up, or whatever. It's actually the Earth 3 Jon Kent. There's so many different ways that they can go. But I'm wondering if by having a story that doesn't even mention the aged up Jon Kent, in a story that is intended to refamiliarize us with all of Superman's core continuity along the way, I just can't help but wonder if we are about to see, in one way or another, aged up Jon Kent go away and young Jon Kent in some form return, and that be the new status quo. I think that would be great. I mean, setting aside LGBTQ plus issues, of course I have things to say about that, but setting that aside, I think there are far too few characters that are allowed to remain young on an ongoing basis. That's why I so enjoyed seeing what was going on with Jeremy Adams' run on The Flash with Wally West and the family stuff there. So far, they're not aging up those kids, which is good. I really want Jon Kent and these other kids in the DC universe to be like Bart and Lisa Simpson. We will be okay. Comic book fans can be okay for decades having kids not age up. We'll all just deal with it and it'll be fine. Just in the same way that we still, well, I don't know, is anybody watching The Simpsons? Theoretically, people are still watching The Simpsons, and they're not asking why Clark and Bart and Lisa haven't grown up yet. So I want those kinds of kids to be in the DC universe. And man, the stuff that they were doing with Jon Kent before aging him up, I so appreciated it. Certainly, that has a lot to do with me being a dad, but I'm not a senior citizen, and I love seeing stories about senior citizen characters as well. The older senior members of the DC universe, there's just so much more richness when we can have a broad spectrum of ages being represented, so many different kind of stories that can be told. And I think that that children in the DC universe, just their existence. I'm not necessarily going to read a book that's about children as the main characters, but just their existence as key supporting characters in the DC universe, it's sorely lacking. That's hugely unrepresented. If we want to do some demographic box checking, kids, I think, are the ones that we most need to do the catching up with. But I'm not into. Ultimately, I don't care about demographic box checking. I just want good stories, and I think there's so much potential for good storytelling with Jon Kent. All right, so I guess those are all my thoughts on comic books. Well, close to it. The ring selection this week is the blue ring, yes, representing hope, even though I dare not hope, and yet I can't help it. We'll see what happens in the coming months and what DC decides to do with Jon Kent. And those, at long last, are all of my thoughts on comic books for now. As always, love getting your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. You can also get this content as a monthly podcast if you want. There's tons of stuff made for you. Check out christiangeekcentral.com. All kinds of content there as we continue to geek out and seek the truth. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.